The bells of King's Landing tolled low and heavy, groaning against the soft morning breeze. Crows circled above the red keep like an omen, but inside, Lord Eddard Stark stood tall and unshaken in the Tower of the Hand. His face was worn, but not weak. His eyes weren't angry, but cold, the kind of cold only a Northman could carry inside his bones. Robert Baratheon was dead, killed by a boar, they said. But Ned Stark had lived long enough to see past drunken hunting tales. He had held the will in his hands. He had read Robert's own words, naming my Lord Protector, Eddard Stark, as the guardian of his children until his son Joffrey came of age. Yet even in the wording, Ned knew Robert had been too trusting. But this time, he wouldn't be. When Petyr Baelish had leaned in with his whispery voice, suggesting they keep the game alive, that Ned bend the truth for political convenience, and install Joffrey for the sake of peace, Ned didn't flinch. He didn't shout either. Instead, he looked Petyr straight in the eyes and said, "I will not live a lie, and I will not let my daughters do so either." And strangely enough, for once, Baelish didn't betray him. He paused, calculating, and then agreed. "I suppose you mean to name Stannis," Petyr had said, tone neutral but eyes ticking with possibilities. "He is not loved. Neither was I when I came south," Ned replied. "But love is not the law. Blood is." And with that, the entire storm changed. The gold cloaks expected to turn on Ned, as they did in that grim timeline we all remember, instead held true. Not because of honor, but because Baelish didn't buy them out this time. Varys, ever the spider, simply watched, silent, calculating, letting the pieces move. When Ned entered the throne room that morning, he came with the sealed will of King Robert and Seer Barristan Selmy at his side. Cersei Lannister sat with her lion cub on the Iron Throne, smug and sharp as a blade. Her golden armor gleamed under the sunlight pouring through the high windows. "Lord Stark," she purred, voice dripping false sweetness, "you come with paper and righteousness, but the king sits here already." Ned said nothing to her. He turned to the hall. "By the will of King Robert Baratheon, first of his name," Ned said loud enough to shake the hall. "His lawful heir is Stannis Baratheon, his true brother, not this boy who has no claim to the throne." The silence was suffocating. Cersei's lips curled. Joffrey stood, fuming and red-faced, shouting something about traitors. But then the gold cloaks raised their spears, not against Ned, but toward the throne. In that moment, Cersei knew. She turned to Petyr Baelish, who simply shrugged, hands folded behind his back, like a man observing chess. "You little snake," she hissed at him. "And yet," Baelish murmured, "you still trusted me." The chaos unraveled quickly. Cersei and Joffrey tried to run, but were caught by the king's guard. Seer Barristan himself took Cersei's arm, grim-faced. She fought, spat, threatened to burn the city to the ground. But no wildfire would save her this time. Ned Stark did not smile. He never smiled in victory. He simply turned to the council and said, "Summon Lord Stannis. The true king must take his place." And from that moment on, nothing in Westeros would be the same again. With Cersei imprisoned and her children's lineage publicly exposed, the Lannister name bled honor faster than gold. Jaime was still in the King's Guard, but quieted. Tywin Lannister, burning with humiliation, retreated to Casterly Rock, sharpening. Revenge in the dark, and the North remembered. Sansa and Arya were returned to their father. No whips, no trauma. No little bird with broken dreams, just 2 daughters returned home, hearts intact. But peace would not last long. No crown passes hands without shadows rising. Far across the sea, the last Targaryens watched the change in Westeros, with new hope in their eyes. And in the wall, something old and forgotten stirred, uncaring of thrones, of lords, of kings. But for now, the wolf had won, and he stood at the heart of the lion's den, not as prey, but as ruler. The days following Cersei's arrest were soaked in a kind of tense calm, not peace, but something that mimicked it just enough to lull the city into stillness. King's Landing had never known such quiet. The taverns were hushed. The brothels emptied earlier than usual. Gossip spread like fire, but it burned only in whispers. The lion had fallen, and the wolf now stood tall in the capital. Ned Stark, named Lord Protector by Robert's dying wish, spent those early days in tireless effort. His first command was simple: keep the city from bleeding. With the Queen and her children under lock and key, and the Lannister influence shrinking, by the hour the threat of riots and retaliation was real. But he moved fast. The city watch was reinforced not just with gold, but with men loyal to the realm, not a house. Seir Barristan became his most trusted ally. Even Petyr Baelish now watched. More carefully, kept his tongue in check for the moment. Still, the hardest part was convincing the small council to accept Stannis. Renly, slick as ever, objected immediately. "Why, Stannis?" he demanded during a tense council meeting. "He's cold, unlikable, and has no idea how to rule hearts." Ned looked him square in the face. "Because he is the true heir. The law does not bend for popularity." "Then let's break the law," Renly shot back. "You need allies, Lord Stark, not enemies." "What does the North gain from Stannis Baratheon?" Ned's voice darkened. "The North gains honor and peace, if we're lucky. You speak of breaking law like it's a parlor game. I speak of upholding the last words of your brother." Varys, watching from the corner like a pale spider in a web, only smiled faintly. "You both make excellent points," he whispered, "but power is not always granted to the rightful. It clings to the cunning." "I will not lie for power," Ned said, "and that," Varys replied, "may be your greatest strength or your downfall." Still, Ned sent ravens to Dragonstone, bidding Stannis to return and take the throne. The legitimacy of Joffrey and his siblings was no longer a question. Grand Maester Pycelle, under pressure and fear, confessed all. He had known of the Queen's secret. He had hidden it. With that, the council fractured even further. But in the meantime, Ned had work to do. He ruled in Robert's stead, not as king, but as warden of order. He sat the Iron Throne only during matters of law, and even then, reluctantly. He listened to the cries of the poor, the concerns of the merchants, and the complaints of the lords. Unlike Joffrey, he ruled with patience. And unlike Cersei, he ruled with restraint. One of the first decrees he made was that Sansa and Arya be allowed to leave the city. But Sansa, stubborn and still clinging to old dreams of court and nobility, refused. "I want to stay, father," she said quietly one evening as they sat alone in the solar. Ned looked at her, brow furrowed. "Why?" "Because this place nearly swallowed us, but we survived. I want to understand it. I want to learn its rules." He studied her face, seeing not the naive girl who once gushed about golden-haired princes, but a young woman whose eyes had been opened too soon. He sighed. "And Arya?" "Already packing," Sansa said with a smile. She said something about swords being better than court. Ned chuckled under his breath. That sounds like her. But outside those walls, danger brewed. Word of Cersei's fall reached Tywin Lannister faster than ravens could fly. In the dark halls of Casterly Rock, he plotted vengeance. He gathered his bannermen, he forged letters in gold and blood. Jaime, now a caged lion in the king's guard, was trapped by duty, and Joffrey, he had gone silent in his cell. No more screams, no tantrums, just quiet, unnatural for someone who once believed himself king. And yet, even as Ned tried to prepare the realm for Stannis' arrival, he couldn't ignore the signs. At night, he dreamed of snow-covered woods and dark wings, ravens screaming, a wall of ice cracking under pressure. Jon's face, pale and serious, beyond the wall. He woke drenched in sweat. Winter was coming. That hadn't changed. But now, the wolf was in command, and across the sea, a silver-haired girl stared into the flames with dragons curled around her ankles, dreaming of thrones made of swords and vengeance soaked in fire. The raven from Dragonstone arrived just before dawn. Its feathers were streaked with grey, like ash on snow, and the message tied to its leg bore the seal of House Baratheon Stannis' seal. Ned opened it with tired fingers. He had been preparing for this moment, but still, the words struck him with the weight of a sword to the chest. I will come, and I will take what is mine. That was all. No warm greetings, no gratitude, no recognition of Ned's efforts to honor the king's will. Just cold, unmistakable purpose, typical of Stannis. Ned handed the parchment to Seer Barristan, who read it silently, then nodded with his usual grim expression. He'll march with fire in his eyes. He doesn't forgive easily. I didn't expect thanks, Ned said. I only expect justice. Still, the message sent ripples through the city. Stannis was coming, and with him came the weight of law, the iron of discipline, and a reputation for merciless resolve. Lords who had quietly backed Renly began to squirm. The merchants grew nervous. The brothels filled again as men sought distraction from what they knew would follow. Another war, and Renly, he vanished before sunrise. No farewells, no final argument. Just gone. His banners disappeared from the gates. Only a few of his men remained behind, and even they refused to speak of where he'd gone. Some said he rode to Highgarden. Others whispered of a secret army in the Reach. But Ned had no time to chase rumors. Stannis was coming, and so was the reckoning. But not all threats were southbound. Far to the north, the wall faced dangers, greater than any throne. And it was Jon's voice that haunted Ned now more than any raven. The last letter from Castle Black had spoken of a scouting party gone missing, rangers who never returned, and something old awakening in the forest beyond the wall. We saw dead men walk, Jon had written, and they do not walk alone. Ned kept that letter hidden beneath his cloak, next to his heart. The realm focused on kings and queens, but he feared that if they didn't act soon, there would be no realm left to rule. He began sending ravens of his own to every great house, to the Vale, the Riverlands, even Dawn. He warned them of the coming winter, not in metaphor but in truth. The Night's Watch was small, underfunded, and the North could not hold. The darkness alone. Most replies were polite but dismissive. Lords laughed behind closed doors. Dead men walking was a tale for children. Ghost stories from the frozen edge of the world. They cared more for the politics of crowns than whispers in the woods. Only one reply gave him pause. It came from Oldtown, signed by Archmaester Marwyn. The fire has stirred, it said, and the long night will come again. But fire alone will not save us. Be careful which gods you trust. Ned wasn't a man of prophecy or old books, but even he could feel it, something unnatural in the wind. He watched the horizon with a soldier's unease, as if expecting enemies to rise from the sea or the soil itself. Meanwhile, the capital braced for Stannis' arrival. Lord Stark ordered Cersei and her children to be moved from the tower cells to house arrest under strict guard. He refused to have them publicly executed, though many demanded it. Justice is not vengeance, he told his men. We will not become them. But tensions were high. Tyrion Lannister had yet to make a move, but Ned knew he would. He was too quiet, too calculating, and Tywin, the old lion, still hadn't responded. Silence from Casterly Rock was more frightening than threats. It meant he was waiting, building something bigger. Arya had already left for Winterfell, riding with a small northern escort. But Sansa stayed. She'd taken to sitting in the Godswood for hours, sometimes with a book, sometimes just staring at the trees. "You're not a prisoner anymore," Ned told her one morning. "I know," she said softly, "but I still feel like one." Ned didn't know how to answer that, so he left her with her silence and returned to the War Council. As the day of Stannis' arrival grew closer, Ned stood again in the great hall beneath the Iron Throne. He didn't sit it, not once since Robert's death. He would not place himself above the law. But he felt the weight of it, as if the swords beneath the seat were pointed at his own back. He was no king. He never wanted to be. But in that moment, he was something else. A man holding the kingdom together with frostbitten hands, while fire and ice drew closer from all sides. The horns blew at midday, long and steady, cutting through the thick summer air with a deep, grating sound that made the very stones of the Red Keep hum. Stannis Baratheon had arrived at the gates of kings. Landing, he came not as a supplicant, nor as a saviour, but as a claimant, cloaked in black and gold, his banners rigid in the dry wind. His army, disciplined and silent, filed in behind him like a tide held back only by the weight of command. They carried no songs. They wore no bright colours. They marched as if the crown were already his and the city simply hadn't realized it yet. From the balcony above the outer wall, Ned Stark watched them enter. His jaw was clenched. This was the rightful king, yes, but he also knew Stannis for what he was, rigid, unyielding, and dangerous in his own way. He turned to Seer Barristan beside him. Let's hope justice matters more to him than pride. Barristan nodded grimly. With Stannis, there's little difference. The meeting in the throne room was brief. Stannis did not bow. He did not greet anyone. He walked straight toward the Iron Throne, stared at it, then turned to Ned. "I hear you honored Robert's will," he said, voice dry and gravelled by years of bitterness. "You have my thanks." Ned bowed his head slightly. "The law is the law, and you are his brother." Stannis looked around the chamber, eyes sweeping across the council members like a man measuring traitors. "Where is the bastard boy?" "In the cells, with his mother and siblings." "Awaiting your judgment," Ned said. Stannis' lip curled. "Their fate is not in question." Ned raised his chin. "I urge mercy, your grace, mercy." Stannis nearly scoffed. "The boy is no Baratheon. His mother is a traitor, and her brother murdered mine. You would ask mercy for that." Ned held his ground. "Joffrey is." A child, Cersei too, is a prisoner now. The realm is watching. What you do next will define your reign. Stannis stepped closer, his voice low but sharp. If we do not set a harsh example now, we invite more lies, more treason. I will not build my rule on softness, Lord Stark. I will not make Robert's mistake. The tension in the room thickened. Even Baelish, lounging on a marble pillar like a bored cat, watched intently. Varys folded his hands, fingers twitching nervously, but Stannis did not argue further. He simply said, I will take the throne tomorrow. The trials will begin the day after. Prepare the city. He walked out without another word. That night, Ned sat alone in his chamber. The candle burned low beside him, and the air smelled of old parchment and sweat. He had tried to honor Robert. He had tried to keep the peace. But the moment he handed the throne to Stannis, he'd passed the sword as well, and now it would fall. He poured himself a cup of wine and stared at the flames. Sansa had said nothing all evening, withdrawn again. She knew what would happen to Joffrey. For all he had been cruel, spoiled, arrogant, he was still a boy she once thought she loved. The pain in her eyes haunted him, but the pain would not end there. The raven from Winterfell had arrived just before sundown. Mester Words were careful but urgent. The umbers speak of shadows in the woods. Entire villages abandoned near the gift. Rangers say animals flee from the north. Something ancient wakes. Another letter from Castle Black followed it. Jon had written, again. We found one of the missing brothers. He was dead. Then he wasn't. We burned him, and only fire stopped him. Ned closed his eyes. The realm was tearing itself apart over names and crowns. But none of it would matter if what his son claimed was true. The dead had begun to walk. He rose from his seat and walked to the map table. His fingers hovered over the north. Then the wall, then further into the white. He could feel the pull, the old duty of a Stark to protect the realm, not just rule within it. His place was not here in the south with politics and executions, but his duty was not yet finished. Stannis was king now, but Ned Stark still had one final task. He would save the realm, even if the realm did not want saving. The sky above King's Landing was painted in thick grey clouds, heavy and slow like the breath before a storm. The city buzzed with tension, not joy. There were no songs, no celebrations. The people didn't cheer as Stannis Baratheon climbed the Iron Throne. They watched in silence, unsure whether to kneel or run. For all their talk of rightful kings, this man was a stranger to warmth. Stannis sat the throne like he'd been carved from the same swords. It was built from straight-backed, cold-eyed. His voice didn't echo like Robert's had. It struck, short and hard. His first decree confirmed what many feared. Queen Cersei, Lannister, and her son Joffrey Baratheon will stand trial on the morrow. If found guilty of treason, their punishment will be death. That same day, the Red Keep was lined with armored guards at every door. Tension curled through its halls like smoke. Ned Stark had no illusions Stannis' rule had only just begun. But already it threatened to spill blood across the realm. The Lannisters would not stay silent, and with Tywin still holding the Westerlands, revenge was not a matter of if, but when. In the cells beneath the keep, Cersei paced like a caged lioness. Her golden hair was tangled now, her hands pale and raw. She had stopped screaming days ago. Now she spoke in quiet riddles to the walls. When Ned visited her the night before the trial, she barely looked at him. You think this is over, she whispered. I think justice is beginning, he said. Her laugh was dry, broken. You think Stannis rules now, but you don't know what my father is. You don't know what I've done, what I've hidden. You win one day, and you think you've conquered the game. But you haven't won, Stark. You've only dealt the first hand. I'm not playing a game, Ned replied. And that's why you'll lose, she said with venom. She stepped closer, her eyes wild but clear. My son may die tomorrow, and the people might cheer or weep. But somewhere, in some forgotten place, something worse than either of us is watching. You feel it, don't you? He stared at her. She tilted her head. You've seen it in your dreams, haven't you? The cold, the dark, the shadows with blue eyes. For the first time in years, something in Ned's chest twisted. What do you know of that? Cersei smiled, not with triumph, but sorrow. Nothing, she whispered, and yet everything. She turned away, her voice growing smaller. They told me once, when I was a girl, that the North held monsters. I used to think they meant your kind, but they meant something else. You think I'm your greatest enemy. I'm not. I'm just the last to fall before the dark comes. That night, Ned sat in silence by the fire, her words echoing. She was no prophet, and yet her voice had the weight of truth. He couldn't shake the sense that she had touched something dark beneath the world. The next morning, the trial began. The throne room was full. Lords, knights, council members, and small folk packed shoulder to shoulder, breathing. In the drama, Cersei stood proud in her chains. Joffrey sulked beside her, quiet for once, rage flickering in his eyes like candlelight ready to jump. Tyrion had returned the night before, slipping into the city with a trail of gold and silence. He stood to represent his family, face unreadable. Do you wish to speak in your defense? Stannis asked Cersei as the chamber hushed. She looked around, scanned the faces, Baelish, Varys, Tyrion, even Sansa at the edge of the room. Then her gaze landed on Ned. Everything I did, she said clearly, I did to protect my children. My family, Stannis did not blink, even treason. Cersei's voice cracked. You have never known love, Stannis. That's why you don't understand what treason even means. Joffrey spoke then, finally, spitting the words. You're all traitors. You let that old fool take my crown. I am the king. The crowd stirred. Guards moved forward. But it was Sansa who stepped forward first, voice trembling but firm. You're not the king, Joffrey. You never were. Silence fell like a sword through the air. Then came the verdict. Stannis rose. Cersei Lannister. Joffrey Waters. The insult in his name clear. You were found guilty of treason against the crown and the realm. The sentence was death. It would be carried out within 3 days. The hall emptied slowly, shock and tension trailing behind every footstep. Tyrion said nothing. His eyes didn't leave his sister or his nephew. When they were led away, he didn't follow. Ned Stark stood outside the hall, staring at the grey sky again. It hadn't rained, but it felt like it had. Something was coming, and it wasn't Lannister gold or Baratheon vengeance. It was colder, older, and it had waited long enough. 3 days passed like the tolling of a slow, grim drum. The people of King's Landing did not cheer when the executions happened. There was no celebration, no banners in the wind, no crowds singing the downfall of the lion. It happened just before dusk, quiet, clinical, final. Cersei Lannister met her death with her chin high and her eyes defiant. She said nothing before the sword fell, not to the executioner, not to the crowd, not even to her brother, who stood among the witnesses with his jaw clenched so hard it looked like it might shatter. Joffrey screamed, kicked, begged, but when the blade came, he too went silent, though not with dignity, only fear, and just like that, the false crown passed into the dust. The next morning, the bells tolled again, not for mourning, but for warning. A raven had come from the west. Tywin Lannister was moving. Word arrived with a scout's corpse pinned to a post outside the city gates, with a Lannister lion burned. Into his flesh, Tywin had gathered nearly every bannerman in the Westerlands and was marching toward King's Landing with a host large enough to choke the roads, and at its head, riding beside him, was Seer Gregor Clegane, the Mountain. Ned stood before the council, the parchment still in his hand, his voice heavy. "We have maybe 2 weeks before they reach the Black Water." Stannis didn't flinch. "Let them come. The law is with us. The city will not fall." But Ned saw what the others did not. Tywin wasn't just coming for vengeance. He was coming to make a point. The execution of Cersei and Joffrey wasn't justice in his eyes. It was war. Even Baelish looked rattled. "Perhaps we might have stopped at imprisonment," he murmured, just loud enough for the room to hear. Justice is a cold blade when wielded by colder men. Stannis didn't even look at him. Better cold justice than warm lies. Tyrion, to his credit, said nothing. He'd stayed behind, refusing to return to his father. Whether out of guilt or grief, no one could say. But his eyes had changed since that day in the throne room. There was a stillness in him now, like a lake before a storm. Meanwhile, ravens from the north brought more troubling signs. Entire villages near the Frostfangs had vanished. The Night's Watch, stretched thin, was losing more men each week. And Jon's last letter came with a note from Maester Aemon. "The wall is not enough anymore. The long night stirs. Send help or send prayers." Ned couldn't sleep. The dreams were back, snow falling on the Red Keep, ice cracking under his feet. Arya's face, grown and bloodied, standing alone in a field of ash. A shadow with blue eyes walking through Winterfell's broken gate. A voice calling his name from far, far beyond the wall. He woke every night with the taste of cold in his throat. He tried again, this time sending letters marked urgent to every lord he trusted. Lord Royce in the Vale, the Mormonts on Bear Island, even the Tarleys of the Reach. He begged them to take the threat from the north seriously. Most ignored it. 1 or 2 sent polite responses about winter provisions. None sent swords. Even Sansa noticed his wear. "You haven't eaten," she said one morning. Her voice was different now. "Less girl, more iron. There's little time for it," Ned muttered. "Will you go back?" she asked quietly. "To the north?" He looked at her, really looked. At her, she was not the girl who came here in a silk dress, dreaming of princes. She was hardened now, not broken, hardened. The city had forged something new in her. "Yes," he said, "I will. When? When the realm no longer needs me here." But he knew it might already be too late. Daenerys Stormborn, across the sea, had begun her march as well. Not with an army, not yet. But the dragons were no longer small, and her dreams had changed. She saw thrones, yes, but not just of iron. She saw white wolves and frozen kings. She saw a north that burned blue, not red. And she saw her path, not through conquest, but through destiny. Back in the capital, the preparations for war grew louder. Blacksmiths worked through the night. The city gates were reinforced. Grain was rationed. But Ned's heart wasn't on Tywin's army. It was on the wall, and what waited beyond it. Because the true war, the one no one wanted to fight, was already on its way, silent, cold, and unstoppable, and he feared that by the time anyone believed him, it would already be inside the gates. The horns of war screamed at dawn. Tywin Lannister's army had reached the Blackwater, just as the ravens had warned. 40,000 men in red and gold lined the southern bank, their tents rising like blood-stained teeth across the hills. Siege towers rolled behind them, and trebuchets were already being built with horrifying precision. They hadn't come for a standoff. They'd come to break the city. Stannis Baratheon stood on the ramparts of King's Landing with arms crossed and jaw locked tight. Beside him, Ned Stark looked through the spyglass. The size of the host made his stomach twist, though he showed none of it on his face. The Lannisters had come in full force, and Tywin was no fool. He wouldn't launch a reckless assault. He'd surround the city, starve it, choke it from the inside. Will he speak? Ned asked quietly. Stannis shook his head. He'll kill. Down in the streets, panic had already begun to bloom. Merchants packed their carts. Children were hidden in cellars. The scent of smoke drifted from burning refuse as poorer folk tried to destroy what they couldn't carry. The city was fraying at the edges, and the siege hadn't even begun. Inside the Red Keep, the War Council met under torchlight. The room felt smaller than ever. Tension clawed the walls. Baelish wore a smile too tight to trust. Varys's hands were folded, twitching. Tyrion, strangely enough, had spoken the most, arguing defensive points, suggesting use of wildfire, redirecting focus from the gates to the river. But Ned wasn't listening to any of them anymore. His mind was in the north. Another raven had come just before the meeting. Not from the wall, from Winterfell. Bran. Father, the wolves are howling every night. Hodor won't go near the Godswood. Maester Luwin thinks it's just nerves. I don't. Something is watching. Something cold. Ned didn't show the letter to anyone. He kept it in his pocket, next to Jon's last message. Stannis began assigning defensive posts, but Ned finally interrupted. I have to leave, he said. The room fell silent. Stannis stared. Leave. My duty is done here. You sit the throne. The realm is yours, but the north my north, stirring. The wall cannot hold without help, and if it falls, there will be nothing left to defend. Baelish chuckled dryly. So, you abandon us before the battle begins. I'm not abandoning anything, Ned said firmly. I'm going where the real war is. Tyrion looked at him, and for once, the mockery in his eyes was gone. And if you're right, then you'll thank me later, or die before you can. Stannis didn't argue. Not much. He only said, you have 5 days before I can no longer spare the men to escort you. Ned didn't need 5. By nightfall, he had gathered 50 of his most loyal men, Northmen, who had followed him from Winterfell and stayed by his side even when the capital had turned against him months ago. Ser Barristan offered to come as well, but Ned refused. You'll be needed here, he said. When the gates break, you'll be the sword the city looks to. Sansa stood at the courtyard gate when he rode out. She looked like a statue. Of herself, older, quieter, hollowed out by all she'd seen. You don't have to stay, he told her. I can take you home. She shook her head. I'm not a little girl anymore, father. If this city burns, I'll burn with it, but I'll stand before I fall. He nodded, pride and sorrow swelling together in his chest. As the gates opened and the wind whipped across his face, Ned felt something shift, a sense of rightness, even amid the chaos. He was going home, not just to Winterfell, but to his true duty, to the wall, to the old oaths. The ride north was fast and cold. He passed broken towns and silent fields. Refugees walked in the other direction. Some cried, others didn't speak at all. Many had that same look in their eyes, the distant, empty kind of fear that doesn't come from war or hunger. It comes from knowing something is wrong with the world. At Castle Black, the men of the Night's Watch stood thinner than he remembered, tired, hollow, fewer than he'd seen in years past, and none younger than Jon Snow. His son greeted him with no smile, only a hard embrace. "They're coming, father," Jon whispered. "How many?" Jon's voice cracked. "Too many." That night, they stood atop the wall together, looking out over the haunted forest. Nothing moved. No wind, no birds, just stillness. Then, a sound, a horn, far in the distance. 3 long blasts. Jon didn't flinch. "They're here." Ned closed his eyes. The true war had begun. Snow fell in slow, heavy flakes, as if the sky itself mourned. Ned Stark stood atop the wall, the freezing wind biting through even his thick furs. Jon Snow stood beside him, ghost pale and rigid, one hand resting on the hilt of Longclaw. Below them, the forest stretched into a white abyss, silent, still, suffocating. But in that silence, they heard something no storm could bury, the crunch of unnatural footsteps, the moan of things long dead. The army of the dead had come. They weren't marching like men. They glided through the snow with jerky, broken movements. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. Whites, their skin peeling and eyes glowing with pale blue fire. And scattered among them were the White Walkers, tall, ghost-like beings wrapped in icy armor, riding dead horses with eyes like polished frost. Ned's breath fogged the air. "We hold," he said, though even he didn't fully believe it. Jon gave him a sideways glance. "We won't, but we try anyway." Below them, the Black Brothers scrambled to their posts. Torches were lit. Oil was poured along the paths. Arrows notched. Boiling pitch readied. Every man there knew this wasn't a siege. It was a death sentence. And still they stood, because that's what the wall was built for. Ned took one last look at the line of the dead, and then he descended the steps, slow and steady. When he reached the courtyard, he drew his sword, ice reforged, retempered, carried once more by the man it was named for. He gathered the men, their faces pale but proud. "We stand for the realm," he said, voice steady. "For every child in their bed, for every farm still growing, for every name that won't burn because we gave our lives here today. Let the dead break their bones on us." Jon stepped forward, raising his sword. "And if we fall together," Ned finished. The horns blew again, not 3 times, but once. The enemy was at the gate. The first wave came like a silent flood, climbing ice and clawing at stone. The pitch was dumped, fire, raining down in sheets. Arrows flew, striking bodies that didn't feel pain. Some fell, most didn't. The dead rose again and again. The wall shook under the weight of death. Jon led the defense on the east side, while Ned held the courtyard. The Whites broke through the lower tunnel within hours. Then came the screams. Black brothers being torn apart, gutted, eaten, the sound of steel meeting bone. the howl of Ghost as he tore through a cluster of wights to protect Samwell, who was shaking but still managing to reload a crossbow. Sir Alistair Thorne fought like a demon before being dragged down by 5 dead men. He did not scream. He cursed them, even as they pulled him into the snow. And then, just when hope began to flicker into ash, the sky changed. A sound like thunder rolled over the wall. A great shadow crossed the moon. No cloud, no winged beast, a dragon, black as night, with fire dripping from its maw. Daenerys Targaryen had come. She rode Drogon through the clouds like vengeance reborn, fire lighting the dark sky. She didn't speak. She didn't land. She only unleashed. Flame bathed the forest. Whites burned by the dozens. The White Walkers recoiled, shrieking in a language that didn't belong to men. Their bodies began to melt beneath the dragonfire. Not all of them, but enough. Drogon swept down once more, sending a blast of flame through the breach. For a moment, just a breath of time, the dead faltered. Jon ran. He ran through fire and corpses to face one of the walkers himself, the blade of Longclaw meeting ice. Their swords clashed with a sound that shattered the air like glass. Behind them, Ned was bleeding from a slash across his shoulder, swinging. Ice with both hands, covering the retreat of the last survivors. And when Jon finally struck down the White Walker, the nearest 100 whites collapsed with it, lifeless again. It was enough, not a victory, but a delay. Dawn broke with fire still burning in the snow. The wall stood, battered, cracked, bloodied, but it stood. Ned looked out across the battlefield. Fewer than 30 men remained alive. Jon stood at the edge, staring out into the forest that now smouldered with ash. Daenerys landed nearby, pale and quiet. She looked at Ned, truly looked, and nodded. "Now they'll listen," she said softly. He nodded. "They'll have no choice." The North had bled. The wall had screamed. And still the dead came. But they were no longer alone. The wolf, the dragon, and the sword of the realm now stood. Together, winter had come. But so had fire, and the Game of Thrones was finally over.